Go ahead, Scott.
Oh yeah, sure thing, sure thing. So, yeah, I'm glad you're doing well, Howard. Everything's going good. Um, since we last talked, I've been doing a lot of research into kind of biblical scholarship and trying to read the Bible and really understand a lot of what's said. And
Uh-huh.
I actually have some questions for you written down that I was really curious about, your opinion. Because a lot of or I think almost all the Gospels really present John the Baptist as kind of being a forerunner to Jesus. He baptizes Jesus. Jesus kind of listens to his ministry for a while before starting his own. And in your opinion, do you think it's safe to say that Jesus might have even been a disciple of John the Baptist before starting his own ministry?
Um, no.
Okay.
Jesus saw him as his um, forerunner,
Mm-hmm.
as a man preparing the way for him.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't a student or a disciple of John the Baptist, but they were cousins,
Okay.
related. And
Uh,
they probably knew each other in childhood.
mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because I was just curious because it looks like John baptizes Jesus, and I'm seeing the chronology of events. So I was just wondering about that, and I came across some biblical historians or biblical scholars that had posed that idea. So that's why I was just curious
Uh-huh.
about it. Okay, but yeah, my next question is the gospel about the Gospel of John. So the Gospel of John seems to be very, in some ways, it is very different than the Synoptic Gospels.
Yes. Yeah.
You, it has I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but it seems to have like a higher Christology in that it
Yes.
really,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I guess my question is, the Gospel of John has Jesus saying things like, "Before Abraham, I was, and myself and the Father are one." But the Synoptic Gospels don't have as high of a Christology, and they don't have Jesus saying those things. How do you what's why is there a difference between what John says and what the other synoptic gospels have to say? Is it the
Uh,
writers have a different theology?
um, John is identified as being very young when he becomes a disciple of Jesus.
Mhm.
And he lived to a very ripe old age on
Mhm.
the Isle of Patmos, where the Gospel of John was written. Um, his Gospel came out after the Synoptics, which are all synoptic means one eye. They're all interdependent. They all all scholars agree that they all came from
Mhm.
they were all written by individuals, but they all came from one source, because they all have a lot of the same stuff in them
Yeah,
from
yeah.
different points of view. John's not like that at all. So written from a different perspective at a later time by a man, John, who was called the beloved disciple, very close to Jesus, and put a lot of thought, a lot of theology into his gospel. And he was not dependent on the other gospels for as his source.
Yeah.
Source of John is John,
Mhm. Yeah. Hmm.
not Q. That's the the common source that scholars identify that the synoptics are used as Q, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The Q source. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I guess my question then is could there be different Christologies between the synoptics and the Gospel of John where they they might have different theologies where the synoptic gospel writers may believe that Jesus is divine but aren't necessarily equating him with God, whereas with
Well,
John.
let me just say that everyone in the world has a different Christology from everybody else. Everybody's Christology is unique to them. We
Yeah.
all impose and shape our understanding of Christ according to our own life, our own culture, our own perspectives.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things about the Gospels is that although there are, and first of all, the Gospels are not biographies. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, we think of a biography as telling the history of a person. The Gospels have no intention of doing that.
Yeah.
They are there to promote faith in Jesus.
Mhm.
And that the difference in them clearly shows that it wasn't a conspiracy. You know, if the gospel writers had gotten together and said, "Oh, let's make up this story about Jesus," and something like that, there would
Yeah.
not be that. The big differences that there are between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I was reading that Jesus is actually one of the most well-documented people in his time and place that we know of. I mean, we have so many independent sources. Just
And contemporary sources,
oh
like
yeah.
for example, Josephus, who was
Yep.
not a follower of Jesus. As a matter of fact, wasn't a believer at all. Um, we have, what on historical figures like Caesar Augustus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Our sources are from people who wrote about him, 200 years after his death.
Yeah.
There's more reason to doubt the existence of Caesar Augustus than there is Jesus.
Exactly. And Alexander the Great. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
it's oh yeah, absolutely. So what do you make of I see it mostly online, but maybe sometimes in person. There seems to be this new wave of people going around saying Jesus never existed, and
Oh,
they
that's not new. That's not new. That's been going on forever.
yeah, I mean, I tried arguing with some of these people and explain to them how much evidence we have, but
Scott, don't. You've got more important things than to argue with people that are um, you know, they're basically I'm just gonna say it flat out, they're irrational
yeah, oh yeah,
because they have no basis for doubting the existence of Jesus.
yeah,
Except, I mean, their only reason is that they want to discredit Jesus. So, why, Scott, do you argue with people that want to discredit you?
no, I try to avoid them.
Um, keep up that policy in your theological pursuit.
Sometimes it's hard to resist the temptation when you see somebody that's so obviously wrong saying something. It's just
All the more reason to have nothing to do with them. Just
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Um, and you know what else is really interesting too? Going back to the talk about Christology, Paul actually has a very high opinion of Jesus's divinity. I mean, he has this one.
yes,
I think it's
yes.
the book of Galatians where he describes Jesus as being pre-existent before his birth.
Well, John does that too.
Yeah, John does that as well. So it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me like after Jesus's death and resurrection that there were a lot of different Christianity was very how to explain it?
Diverse.
Diverse. There were some people I was reading. There were actually a group of early Jesus followers. I don't know if you can call them Christians because everybody was Jews at the time, but they actually believed that Jesus was just a man. They believed that he wasn't divine at all. But they did believe he was the Messiah. So we don't see that these days with Christianity. So why was
Oh,
or
yes, you do.
oh,
Yes,
we
you
do?
do. Yeah, that's the diversity in Christianity, um, in terms of what Jesus really was, and
Yeah.
it's still there. You want a name of a group that believes Jesus was just a man? Unitarians.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow. I haven't spent a lot of time with them. Interesting. So in I guess there's two ways of looking at it. One way is, you have this very radical, charismatic divine figure, right? And naturally the go-to conclusion for a lot of people is going to be, he can't be divine. Nobody's divine. It would be hard for them to believe it. So over time, you see the theology start to evolve. That's one way of looking at it. And then another way of looking at it, I guess, is the I don't know, atheist or whatever sort of view of oh yeah, well, that must mean he wasn't divine from the beginning. So, I've done a lot of research on biblical scholars, and I've heard both opinions.
Well, there was also a much larger group who believed that Jesus was totally divine and only pretended to be human, and he wasn't human at all.
Yeah, you're right. That don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they even believed that he wasn't crucified because they said God couldn't be
Yeah.
crucified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you can see how the theology really evolved over time, and it was
Yeah.
really interesting. I just in a way, it got me thinking too. I hope that we landed on the correct understanding, and that the correct understanding really won out, because I don't have a time machine. I can't go back there, but I guess that's a matter of faith, right? To hope that the correct theology evolved over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. Okay. And speaking of mythicists and people who say, "Oh, Jesus never existed," I think there's another group of people as well that are, maybe somewhat, you would say, are somewhat radical. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jesus Seminar
Yes,
group.
I am. As a matter of fact, I had a class with a member of the Jesus Seminary.
Oh wow, they reach some conclusions that I don't really think are accurate to, honestly. I don't know if you've ever read some of the conclusions that they've came to of.
Yes, I don't care for the Jesus Seminar. I think that they're
Yeah.
but a bunch of scholars just playing the scholarly game. I was in academia for 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, it's a game.
It is.
You ever heard the term publish or perish?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Um, um, in academia, that is the reality.
Mhm.
If you want us to get in academia, stay in academia, and succeed in academia, you need to publish.
Yeah.
Now, I was in art, so our publishing was exhibitions. You had to exhibit. If you were in theater, you had to be involved with theatrical productions. But generally, for the majority of people in academia, it was publish or perish. And
Mhm.
so um, it doesn't matter if anybody ever reads anything you ever publish. That's not important. Just get your name and
Yeah.
in your writings and journals. And I think that the Jesus Seminar people, by the way, the man that I had, name is Art Dewey, uh,
Mhm.
at Xavier University. I took a class with him. Really nice guy, very, very biblically knowledgeable, and he was not a Christian.
Oh, what religion was he?
Yeah.
Oh, so okay. Okay.
His own religion.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of yeah, a lot of the conclusions that some of these biblical scholars come to, it involves a lot of guesswork, it involves a lot of assumptions, and and
Exactly.
and they all disagree with each other too. You can find a scholar that believes in anything, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of debate. Yeah. So
Because unfortunately, in the United States, and I think this is true in a lot of countries, the um, universities have overwhelmed the seminaries.
yeah.
Um, Seminaries are closing right and left, and
Mhm.
universities are where the quote biblical scholars reside.
Mhm.
And the irony of all this is that many of the early universities in the United States were created for the sole exclusive purpose of training people for ministry. Harvard University, Princeton University, Yale University, on and on. And the theology departments of those schools are filled with people who are not Christians. And I had a pastor once who was a product of Harvard Divinity School, and he didn't believe in anything.
And he was a pastor? That seems a little.
It's my pastor.
Wow. He didn't believe in anything. What do you mean by he was an atheist? Is that what you mean?
He didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus. He didn't believe in afterlife. He didn't believe in angels. He didn't. You want me to keep going?
Wait, then what motivated him to become a pastor if he didn't believe in any of that?
That's an interesting question. I've wondered. I know pastors like that they're pastors, but they have little or no faith. And I'm like, why are they doing this? Because it's actually, frankly, a really lousy profession to be in. Pays very poorly, and it's not prestigious anymore. Why would you want to be one?
I don't understand the motivation. That's really weird. Wow.
Well, maybe their parents pushed them that way. Maybe they thought it would be a nice life. Maybe
Yeah.
they thought it would be prestigious. I don't know why.
Yeah. I don't know why either. Wow. That's really weird. Okay. So,
I've kind of given up on trying to psychoanalyze people for a couple of reasons. One is I'm not trained.
yeah.
I'm not trained to be a psychoanalyst. Two, the only way you're ever going to find out the answer to these things is to have a lot of sessions with the people, individual sessions where they tell you the truth. Like a lot of people are in psychoanalysts for years,
Yeah.
meeting weekly, trying to get to the truth of why they are and why they think the way that they think and what they do.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen, right? And
Mhm.
lastly, I've got more important things to do with my life than being involved with things that are absolutely fruitless.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yep. Yeah. So I got to learn that lesson. I got to stop arguing with these people.
Yeah.
I got to learn. Yeah. No, definitely.
As your psychiatrist, why are you spending your time arguing with these people? No, don't answer the question, but I mean, seriously, it's
No, you're
fruitless.
right. It's almost like a temptation that when you see people who are so obviously wrong, I have to like hold back, like, oh, don't correct them, don't say anything. Yeah, no, totally.
If you want to have a fruitful time with your life, read good theologians, and there's lots of them out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there are, yeah. And there are still a few biblical scholars, I think, who are pretty good as well. There's a few, that are deeply religious, and they
Read N.T. Wright. Read everything he wrote.
yeah, NT Wright, that's another one. Yeah, I should read that. Yep. Yeah, I know of him. Okay, great. And another question I had for you was about the because we have the canonical gospels, but as I'm sure you know, in early Christianity, there were so many gospels. I mean, more than we even know about. And we found
Yes.
some of them. We found, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Thomas. What's your opinion on a lot of these gospels that archaeologists have found?
Well, the early church, when they formed what we call the New Testament, they were aware of those gospels, and they discussed them, and they read them, and they knew about them. And the problem is that they found flaws in them. They found some of those gospels were pretty good, but they had things that the early church thought were bad Christology. So
Yeah.
they excluded them from the Bible. The most controversial book that they ultimately put in the Bible was the book of Revelation, which there were a lot of people that were strongly opposed to putting that in the Bible, making that part of the New Testament. But it was a democratic decision-making process, and the majority went out. But there was I forget the exact name of it, but there was one attributed to Paul, which was very good, but it had some things in it that some people found very objectionable, so it was excluded. But there were, and of course, in the ancient world, to attribute something to someone famous was a common practice. Like, you write a book on theoretical or paper on theoretical physics, and you want people to take it seriously, so you say that it was actually written by Einstein.
Yep. Oh yeah.
That was a common practice in the ancient world. So, attribution is in the ancient world is absolutely unreliable.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I hear you. And there was one book in particular that because I've actually looked at some of these lost gospels, and honestly, I think the people that ultimately chose the New Testament books did a good job. I think they
Yes.
chose
Yeah.
I think they chose the books that were closest to the source
Yeah.
as they could find. So I think for the most part they did a good job. But there was one book that struck me as by the way, some of these books are actually kind of crazy. I don't know if you've read the one where it talks about Jesus as a child and he went around killing people who he was.
Thomas. That's the Gospel of Thomas. Yeah. No.
It's nuts. Yeah.
I have read it actually.
Yeah, it's nuts. I took a look at it. But there was one book in particular that seemed to me like it did have it like it seemed like it was, well, maybe a little bit more accurate, maybe a little bit closer to the source, and that's the Gospel of Thomas. I don't know if you know, it's a sayings book. So it's Jesus says this, Jesus says this. And because a lot of the things that Jesus says are actually very similar to what we have in our canonical gospels, which makes me believe it might be an independent stream of another source, in other words, another stream
Right.
of information.
Right.
So I found that book really interesting. I don't know if you've taken a look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have any passion narrative, or it doesn't talk about Jesus' resurrection, but it's just purely a sayings book. So I found that one to be really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's another book as well. There's one that talks about, I think Jesus had a romantic relationship with Mary Magdalene, which
Right.
I don't think is true, but yeah, people have been speculating that forever. So yeah, but anyway, yeah. So I think for the most part they did a good job at choosing the books that were kind of earliest to the course. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And then another question I had for you was about the virgin birth narratives. I met so the resurrection seems to be the most important thing that really started Christianity, but I've met some Christians over the years that have said the virgin birth narratives were never intended to be taken literally. So they believe in the resurrection and the divinity of Jesus, but they don't believe in the literal virgin birth narratives. What do you make of those types of Christians?
Basically, they don't have enough trust or faith in God, because in my understanding, God created the world and everything in it. And could God come into the world as a divine being, fully human, fully divine, which of course I'm relating this to the virgin birth, that Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, so that she had this being in her that was fully human and fully divine, which she, by the way, she believed in, that he was that. So I accept the virgin birth. The important thing to me is not her virginity. The important thing is the divinity. on the paternal side of Mary
Yeah. Yes.
is, completely believable.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, no, I totally understand. And I know there's some denominations that believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, but that's the one thing that
I don't believe
yeah,
that.
me either. And the reason I don't believe in that is because the Paul's letters and some of the gospels as well mention Jesus had brothers and sisters. I mean,
Yeah, right.
explicitly state that.
Yeah,
So and so I just don't see how that could be possible. And one of his brothers, I don't know if you probably already know this, James became a huge leader in the
right.
church, in the early church.
The first leader. Yeah,
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean Paul talks about him on a number of different occasions. So and it looks like also according to the Acts of the Apostles, a lot of times James and Paul kind of butted heads a little bit because
right.
they
Yeah.
at first they had some
James
different
was
views.
more conservative. Paul was the radical liberal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Paul was a radical liberal. But it looks like eventually, according to Paul's letters and Acts of the Apostles, eventually James sided with Paul, it looks like.
Right.
They
Right.
had their council and he sided with them. So yeah, man. Paul's contribution to Christianity is cannot be understated. I mean, if it wasn't for his radical liberal ideas, I don't know if Christianity would be as big as it is today. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely. You're absolutely right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Paul's
mean,
my hero.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. For him to do what he did, I mean, it was a massive undertaking. And there's speaking of which, there are some people today some Christians, unfortunately, who believe that Paul psyops the whole thing, that you know what I mean? He kind of took over Christianity and moved it in the wrong direction. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think Paul was dishonest. I mean, he
No,
was,
I think he moved it in the right direction.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't think he's lying either. I think he genuinely believes what he said. I mean, nobody undergoes that much persecution for a lie. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Paul's suffering is just unbelievable that he persisted
Oh yeah.
considering what he suffered.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And same thing with Peter. I mean, Peter, was arrested several times. He was apparently crucified. I mean, yeah,
They all were. They all were.
yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
Beheaded or crucified or tortured to death, whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I don't think there's any reason to believe that they were lying. I mean, I just don't see how anybody would lie for all that martyrdom and suffering. It doesn't make
Well, I mean, look at the reward they got for being disciples of Jesus. They all suffered. They were all poor. They were all persecuted.
yeah.
Uh, they all traveled way beyond their comfort zone.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah.
why would anyone, voluntarily accept that kind of life? I know I wouldn't. I don't have that kind of courage.
Oh yeah, no, me either. I mean, I don't know. I don't have that kind of courage either. I mean, it's
Yeah,
crazy what they did. I mean, look at James, the brother of Jesus. He was stoned to death, you know? It's crazy.
yeah.
So yeah. And speaking of a lot of the disciples, one thing that I think it's a little bit of a shame that we know a lot more about Peter than we do most of the other disciples. I mean, Peter, John, there's a handful, but once you get into like Bartholomew, Thomas, we don't know as much about them as
Oh,
we
no, no, almost nothing about them. Yeah.
yeah. So it's I don't know. Did you ever feel
But there are some pretty credible books about some of the disciples that they're not in the Bible because they're not about Jesus, but they're about the disciples. Like, for example, Thomas, who, um, there's quite a bit about him going to India and founding the churches in India.
do you think that because when we talk about books outside the New Testament, I'm always skeptical. So do you think there's a lot of truth to that, or that it could be historically accurate?
Well, you can look for evidence
Mhm.
from what the book says about whether there's a possibility. Like, for example, Thomas going to India. There are churches in India today
Mhm.
that claim to have been founded by Thomas.
Oh, wow. That must be really old if that's the case.
Well, the 2,000-year-old churches that say Thomas founded this church, and they have, um, you know, not great documentation, but documentation that what they're saying is valid. So, like, gee, these books claim Thomas went to India, and then there's churches in India that said, yeah, he was here and he founded this church that we've been members of for 2,000 years. And it's like, gee, is that evidence? Like, this sounds like it to me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah. Sometimes, honestly, I don't know if you ever get this feeling, but sometimes I really wish I had a time machine so I could go back in time and just, see everything
But
that has happened.
I mean, there's an expression that seminaries are cemeteries, because so many people, when they go to seminary, leave.
Hmm.
When the seminary that I went, 1/3 of our class never graduated. They dropped out.
Why
You
is that?
know, going to seminary involves doing a lot of critical thinking.
Mhm.
For example, we have been talking about extra biblical books about
Mhm.
early Christianity, right?
Yeah.
It's outside the Bible about early Christian. We had to read a lot of that stuff, and we were encouraged to read the things that we weren't required to read,
Mhm.
because at seminary they want you to look at the whole, the questions that you're asking and that you're interested in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't voluntary. We had to read all that stuff and
Wow.
look at it critically, like
Mhm.
we're trying to have a critical discussion about this stuff now, about
Yeah.
what's worthwhile and what's valid and what's not.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they go to seminary, they couldn't handle it.
Wow. It's not for everyone. I mean, you have to really be deeply interested in this stuff to analyze it as deeply as I have.
But you also have to have a strong faith,
Yeah, no, I understand.
because faith
Mhm.
looks for the truth.
Mhm.
And the truth is a spiritual understanding about what the author is trying to tell you.
Mhm.
You know,
Just have to jump
um,
in, fellas. We only have like 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So,
All right.
sorry to cut you short, Scott.
That's okay. That's all right.
there's um,
Mhm.
higher truth. Like, for example, one of my best friends is a doctor, and we got into a very heated, strong conversation about fact-based decision making, which is the basis of science, which is the basis of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And the point that I kept trying to make to her was, she was talking about scientific experiments, which are fact-based.
Mhm.
Medicine does more harm than good. Therefore,
Yes.
do not prescribe this medicine, right?
Yeah.
But I said to her, I said, yeah, but your whole career is based on relying upon authorities, because you are in the practice of medicine. You see, patients every day, and you make prescriptions for them to get better. You know,
Yeah.
um, that's all based on authorities that you trust, not on your own personal experience.
Mhm.
And that's what we do in theology. You know,
Mhm.
an author, a contemporary author who's writing today, Richard Rohr, Rohr.
Mhm.
Have you read him?
No.
I strongly recommend him. You know, I think he's written a bunch of things that I've found very inspiring and very truthful, and he's
Mhm.
stretched my understanding. He's
Mhm.
a Franciscan priest, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Um, so we rely, our fact-based decision-making is based primarily on authorities.
Mhm.
Sometimes the authorities are helpful, sometimes not. When I went to Kenya to do evangelism, a man from Washington, D.C., who was a Kenyan, called me up and warned me about all the dangers of going to Kenya. I think he had very good intentions, but what I found in Kenya was I felt very safe, very secure, and the people exceedingly friendly and open. And I was never in any danger in Kenya, and this guy had me kind of paranoid about going there.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah, and going back to our conversation about old Christian texts that weren't in the Bible, I mean, they did that too, right? They gave their titles, the title of their books, apostolic authority to try to convince people of whatever they were talking about.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it all ties together. My last question for you, really quick here, is I was looking at I was looking at the statistics behind how the Christian population is actually decreasing over time, and Islam is increasing and projected to, if it continues in the next, I think 50, 100 years from that, Islam is projected to overtake Christianity as the world's dominant religion. What is your opinion on the future of Christianity, and what's happening here?
Christianity is having a huge revival in what are called the underdeveloped parts of the world, like Africa, South America, Asia. And so what you're talking about is straight line projection. And here's a fact-based decision. Straight line projection is not true.
Yeah.
Projections go up and down, up and down, and up and down. And so my hope and my belief is that Christianity is having a big revival in a part of the world that we don't pay much attention to.
Yeah.
Because there's been a big decline in Christianity in the developed world, like Europe and America. I mean, the United States, and it's having a huge revival in other parts of the world. And so I don't believe that Islam is going to overtake Christianity.
Okay. That's very good to know.
She's less than a minute, man. I just don't want it to shut off in your guys' mid-conversation here.
That's
So,
okay.
yeah.
That's okay.
Well, how did you like the conversation, Cory?
Loved it. Scott, you always impress me with your questions, man. And just so you know, you got some fans, some viewers love when you come on.
I do.
So,
Wow,
yeah,
I'll have to read the comments. Thank you.
you will, man, for sure.
you.
And Howard, you do excellent answers too, by the way. I some of the stuff you asked, Scott, kind of been on my mind too. So awesome. So
Awesome.
do appreciate you guys both taking the time to do this.